All right. Well, we'll allow people to start coming in here, but we appreciate everyone being here tonight, or maybe late afternoon, depending on your time zone today. And thanks for FrontLobby for setting this all up for all of us. I'm excited to kind of get started here, answer all your questions. And I mean, Kayla, we were talking before we started here. There's even a ton of new news that even came out today that we could probably chat about today. That things have changed. I don't know, Zachary, if you've seen that yet, but things are changing a little bit with the landlord tenant side of things, which I know you're very excited to talk about. And I don't want to spoil anything, but the title of this webinar is called "Is This the End?" And I don't think it is. I think it's just a moment in time where things are obviously a lot more difficult than it used to be. I'm going to keep going here for another 30 seconds, then we'll get into it as people are kind of coming in here to make sure everyone gets settled. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks for spending your night with us. And our goal is really just to deliver value, answer your questions, and have an open conversation on what we're seeing right now all across Canada. Being on the landlord side of things is obviously a lot different than what we have been through previously. I'm going to start with some housekeeping for everybody that's on the call tonight. So sometimes Zoom will pick the wrong device. So if you go down to the bottom and click the arrow next to the mic icon, you can switch your input or output. So just so you guys know that as we're going through today's call. You can also make sure that you change your view depending on what you want to look at. So you can do speaker or gallery view. So if you just want to focus on the person speaking at that moment, you can do the speaker view. If you want to see all of us at once, you can pick the gallery view. And make sure to join the discussion in the chat below. We are going to do a Q&A at the end of tonight's webinar. We're going to answer as many questions as we possibly can, and also the questions that we deem acceptable. So, we're not guaranteed to answer everything, but we'll try our best absolutely to do that as well. Few other things is the Q&A feature is enabled, and this is where you're going to be submitting your questions. So in your Zoom, especially on the desktop, you'll see that Q&A at the bottom. So if you have a question, we will get to it, but we're going to do it near the end of the webinar. This is being recorded, and we'll send out the recording materials to anybody that needs it afterwards. And I would say 95% of today's information is general advice, other than maybe if Zachary gives you a piece of advice, because he is actually a lawyer, but the rest of us are not that. So let's talk about today's agenda really quickly. We're going to go into a discussion with all of our guests today and really get into what we're seeing on the landlord rental side of things in today's market conditions. Then we're going to do the Q&A, and then we are going to do the next steps and the free resources that FrontLobby is going to give you as we wrap things up today. Quick introduction of tonight's panelist. Steve Karrasch is here with us tonight. Steve is a realtor in Surrey, which is just outside of Vancouver. Steve's been selling real estate for over 17 years. He's also my co-host on the Tom Storey Show, which Kayla was on recently. Zachary was on maybe a month ago. So, the whole gang is back together tonight. Steve, give him a chance. You'll like him, okay? Just give him a chance, and I think you'll like him. Kayla Andrade has also joined us tonight. Kayla is awesome. She will bring the energy tonight. Bought her first rental property at 18 and has spent 15 years championing housing policies, promoting rent reporting to strengthen the landlord-tenant accountability. This is not just a landlord webinar. We're not just pro-landlord. We're trying to make sure that tenants and landlords are on the same page. So, Kayla, we're excited to have you here, and we'll get into your opinions in a second. And Zachary Soccio-Marandola, I hope I said your last name okay there, Zach. He's a real estate lawyer in the city of Toronto, but comes with a unique perspective because he was also and still holds a real estate license. So he can see things from different angles, and the information that Zach puts out on his Instagram is so valuable. There's very few real estate lawyers willing to actually put themselves out on social media and share what they know and help basically anyone try to learn a little bit more. And the last person is myself. My name's Tom Storey. I am also a landlord myself. I live in Toronto. I've been running a real estate team here for the last 12 years, and we deal a lot with investor clients, specifically in the downtown Toronto condo market. Okay, so we're going to get started with our first poll of the night, and then we'll bring in the panelists to talk about what we're going to talk about. And you can probably see the poll that has jumped up there on the screen. So make sure to give your answer, and we'll get to the results in a little while here. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to fill this out, but the question is pretty simple. have you considered selling or leaving the rental business in the past year? I find a lot of what happens is that all the kind of negative stories seem to rise to the top of the news headlines, even though it only represents a small percentage of the overall landlord tenant community. And I feel like it's in a lot of people's minds. And even earlier today, like I literally had a conversation with someone that hadn't been paid rent in 4 months and was trying to figure out what to do. And I think there's all these things happening at once that we need to find realistic solutions that the way the rules work can't be gamed. So let us know if you've actually thought about it. I'm just going to click off mine here and let's get into today's panelists. So topic one here is, why does it feel like a crisis? We've been hearing it everywhere. Landlords are tired, they're frustrated, and some are willing to walk away. So Steve, I actually want to start with you. Are you seeing your clients, representing your clients that are landlords, with a tenant gives notice? Do they want to rent it out again, or are they trying to sell it off? Like, is the media trying to make this worse than it really is? What are you seeing in your day-to-day business?
Well, you nailed it there. It is definitely if a tenant gives notice or when a tenant gives notice, that's the kickoff to, am I going to keep doing this or am I not? So that's really one of the most in-depth conversations we're having right now, because I'm in British Columbia. If you want to sell a tenanted property, it's, I don't want to say impossible, but it's darn near, and a lot of people aren't interested in them. Right. So are people begging me to, take the listing and let's get it sold if they're landlords? Absolutely not. But they are looking at the changes that have happened and how most of the changes here in BC anyway are mostly in favor of the tenant. And then their increase in interest rate, probably most often. And then is that worth continuing? And that's where I'm trying to have that discussion with them now as a real estate agent about, if you are looking to sell within the next short while because the market's not good, it's better to do it when it's vacant versus, I personally think, what I encourage my clients to do is, let's hold on to this thing,
Mhm.
because I'm a landlord and I know that that's where the long-term wealth will grow for me and for my clients, right? So is it as scary as the news makes it? Of course not. But if you've had a bad experience over the last little bit, there are definitely landlords that are looking to get out because the cards have kind of stacked against them.
That makes sense. And Kayla, on your side of things, like you've talked to thousands of landlords really on like a yearly basis. What are you hearing from landlords? Are people frustrated? Are they okay with it? Or what are you finding on your day-to-day conversations?
Before today, I did see like an uptick in landlords getting out of the industry. I like to take like the anonymous members in our group, and they're coming out right on social media talking about why they're getting out regarding Toronto's policies and the rules and regulations at the provincial level and the municipal level. We're always seeing hope from our government and hoping that the government will make proper changes, because it's not just about the market in itself with, what your property is, what the rental rate is. We're seeing a decrease in tenants coming to us, qualified tenants, but we're also seeing that dispute resolution system failing landlords at the same time. So I am seeing very much a very split, or they're starting to say, I'm just going to pull out of Ontario. I'm going to move my investments into the States. And we're going to see a lot of gurus and experts who really much channeled their business and their investments in this province, and they're now coming out on their social media talking about moving to the States. So I right now I still see a 50-50, but there's still just a way for us just to pivot. And I think that's what we're here tonight to teach landlords, and to learn how to pivot their business and hold on and weather the storm.
Yeah, I got a quick follow-up question to that. Do you feel like there seems to be the people that are exiting the business right now on the landlord side seem to be more of the mom and pop style landlords? Maybe I own two rental units.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's not a great direction if there's less of that and it's more just big corporations building everything, and big corporations being the landlord versus, the people that own 5 units? Is that a direction we don't want to go to? We kind of have to have a mix of both.
Well, we definitely do need a mixture of both, and I know that the small landlords own like majority of the rental stock. But when you see like places here in Ontario and other provinces incorporating, rent control, and for the landlords in Ontario, like 2.1% for 2026, and then you have an increase in your property taxes, your insurance, your utilities. Like, how do you expect them to weather the storm when all these prices and these expenses are increasing, and tenants are not vacating as often as they used to. So this is why there's such a, you know, a demographic of people talking about rent control being a problem and a symptom of, you know, this housing crisis, because now as landlords we have to sit back and pivot when we do have a tenant vacate. We need to increase the rent that is going to be market and appealing, but have it reasonable to where it is going to be a reasonable rate for 3 to 5 years instead of 1 to 3 years. So we really now have to increase the rent more than what we would have normally done, just because we see how little we are allowed to increase the rent on rent controlled units. And that's why you're going to see bigger landlords come in, and they are going to want to get into doing redevelopment. Even small landlords may want to get into redevelopment of those current rent controlled units, just because they know that there's an incentive into not having rent control if you have a new build after 2018.
That's a good point. Now, Zachary, going to you on the legal side of things, you know, is there anything you've specifically seen in the last few years that has made it more like difficult to operate as a landlord, or things that are falling on your desk that are becoming issues for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the last few years from like a landlord's perspective, I wouldn't say it's necessarily about one specific law or one rule that's changed, but to me, it's the uncertainty and the inconsistency. So, I mean, in Ontario, Landlord and Tenant Board handles all the tenancy issues. They have complete jurisdiction. So, when that system feels broken, or for even good landlords who are doing everything right, they end up feeling completely powerless. So, and I mean, timing is a big part of that, right? Getting a hearing in a reasonable amount of time in order to adjudicate a matter is a real issue, right? I mean, I recently helped a landlord who tenants bailed 2 months into the lease, right? No notice. They filed a bogus maintenance claim against him. The landlord had to respond with their own application for the lost rent and the damages. Now, that whole thing was adjourned 3 times. One, because an adjudicator was sick, twice because they just couldn't actually get to it in the day. And it's not just frustrating, it becomes costly, right? Like the landlord has to take time off work. They have to pay for legal representation to show up, only to be told to come back months later, time and time again. Right? I mean, that thing started back in 2023. We just got it resolved a few weeks ago. So that's more
Wow.
than 2 years of stress where, the landlord has no idea if they're going to get their money back, or worse, if they're going to end up having to pay out on a claim that was essentially filed against them as a threat. So when I think about, what's really changed, it's not the law itself, but it's the confidence in our system that it will actually back you up when you are in the right. Because enforcing your right, it's becoming slower, it's more expensive, and even the outcomes are uncertain.
Right. So I think that was a great start to, okay, what are we seeing right now? We're going to move next to what's really happening and give you guys a bit more real life examples. Just before we do that, we're going to go to the poll results for the first poll that we put up there. So there you go. 24% of people seriously considering getting out. 36% of people, yes, but I'm going to still hang it in there. 35%, nope, I'm staying. And new to being a landlord is 6%. So, still there's a lot of people. It's like 35% are like, nope, not happening. And then another 35% are like, I'm going to stick around, but I don't love it. And then there's 25% of people on this call that probably own rental units that are thinking about getting out of it. And I think maybe that's a thing that we should address more as we continue on in today's conversation.
And Tom, there's 6% of people still smiling because they're brand new. So welcome.
I don't know.
Welcome.
Yeah, we say that to new real estate agents. Like, you're still smiling. You must be new. Now let's get to topic number 2, which is called "What's Really Happening." So you hear all these things happen, and you see these news headlines, and I think that the unique perspective we have tonight is between Zachary, Steve, myself, and Kayla is we have actual like real life examples. So Steve, again, I want to go back to you to start. What are you seeing in the current market? Are investors buying? If you're buying a rental unit in your market, what's the down payment needed to get to that break even point? Or the cash flow. Everyone wants the cash flow. Where's it at right now in your market in the West Coast?
My thoughts are, and I'm a little biased because I do real estate sales usually for resale properties, so I don't do a lot of the pre-sale stuff. The resale investor is still buying because those properties to some degree make sense. The pre-sale stuff is kaput for now. It's gone. And that's fine. Like, I didn't really believe in the pre-sale model originally, right? But the resale model, of which was on sale compared to pre-sale stuff, those investors are still there. but I am noticing a trend that they are usually a little bit older folks that have, I'm going to say, considerable amount of wealth or equity in other real estate. And so they're not against feeding their rental monthly. That is the reality of my market, is until you hit at least 35% down, you're not even breaking even on cash flow. So it's a reality that most people are looking at their rentals in this area as some sort of almost like an RRSP. Like, this is going to be a negative cash flow for a certain amount of time, but when I retire, I'm going to have something that's fully paid off that's paying me an income. That is the realities. So is it keeping up with costs? No. And of the people that do want to sell the most, they are the people who likely bought at a time when they shouldn't have. They bought with leveraged cheap money, and now, they can't keep up. So those are the people that I'm seeing that likely want to sell the most. But are investors gone? No. Our team is working with investors way more than I thought they would, given the downturn in the marketplace.
Interesting. And Kayla, from your side, with these small landlords trying to adjust to everything right now, like, are they hanging on? Are they giving up? What are you seeing in your daily conversations?
I got a text tonight saying I'm out of the business. I'm totally done, just because they just got derailed by a broken system with loopholes at the landlord tenant board, right? So it's at a point where I still believe that we have a great opportunity to still be in the business. We just have to pivot in a way that we're protecting our landlords from not having a professional tenant in their unit, where it's going to take months and years sometimes to even get them out. So we have to sit back and say, okay, we do have a downturn, but I always tell people it's almost like the toothpaste, where we're going to give you the toothpaste. You're paying the same price. It's going to be a little bit less than the tube, just until we can kind of weather the storm together. But I know that the government is starting to intervene in many different sectors, especially the federal government coming in, wanting to be the landlord themselves, and getting their hand into some pre-designed properties being built on federal land. So it is going to be just making sure we have the right tools for these landlords to be able to hold on. And that is right down to making sure you're picking a great tenant, making sure you're picking a tenant that is legit. Their job is very secure. I think the tariffs are also very scary for a lot of these landlords, and of course our tenants, who are going to be sitting there not knowing what's going to happen. And we are still seeing people leaving the province and moving into other provinces, not just their investments, but them physically moving themselves. So I think we just have to sit back and hold on and keep watching closely. But I can tell you right now, my husband came home tonight and he's telling me about these properties that he went to go see today. So there is that need where we're still out there. Sometimes we're going to get these deals. And I think 2026 is still going to be a year where we're going to probably see those, like Steve said, those people who bought when they shouldn't have. And they're going to be offloading it potentially in 2026, in which the investors who still want to be in the game, this is an opportunity for them to pick up a really good deal.
I think also, to put a positive spin on all of this, is like, investors are still active, real investors. Speculation has exited.
Yeah.
That's what I think the difference is. So like, someone looking to buy something and flip it was never an investor anyways, right? They were just hoping it got to a point and they were going to get out of it, where I think the real investors are still there, but they're getting, slightly frustrated. And Zachary, going to you on that topic, what misconceptions are you seeing about how people, or about how the law protects or fails to protect landlords right now, where they think like, oh, this is just how it works? And you're like, actually, no, this is how it works. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, my practice itself is mostly transactional and all in the residential space. So just inherently, the misconception I see the most surrounds, I'm going to be very specific, surrounds N12 notices in the context of a sale, right? And it usually goes something like this. The property is sold firm. The landlord serves an N12 on behalf of the buyer. The tenant has to leave by a certain date because they promised vacant possession in the agreement. But the truth is that notice, it doesn't guarantee vacant possession at all. It just starts a legal process. And if you actually like sit down and read that N12 form, it tells the tenant, hey, you do not have to move out if you disagree. The landlord can apply to evict you, and you'll have a hearing where you can explain your reasoning. So in other words, the tenant has an inherent right to a hearing before being evicted, even with an agreement of purchase and sale. And that's kind of where that problem starts, right? A lot of agreements At least, a lot of them I still see don't actually build in, number one, the timeline needed to actually have this process play out. And there's no contingencies, or I guess what you would call buffers, to build in if the tenant doesn't actually leave when they're supposed to. So what we see is that termination date arrives, the tenant doesn't leave, and suddenly now the seller is in breach, or they're scrambling and they're trying to settle, they're trying to delay the deal or make a deal with the tenant so that they can actually close. And I'm sure a lot of the landlords here are actually seeing this, right? Tenants are becoming more aware. I've heard of Facebook groups where they kind of push and help you through this, where, they know the buyer wants the unit vacant. They know that the deal will fall apart without it. And in some cases, they're using that as actual leverage to try and get more money out of the landlord. So, if you're thinking about selling a tenanted property, you really have to weigh that value of, selling it vacant versus selling it tenanted, right? Because in some cases, that cash for keys agreement up front, it might cost less than trying to market a tenanted property to that smaller group of buyers, who are actually willing to accept a flexible or uncertain closing date that's actually necessary to protect the landlord. So for me, it's not the landlords don't have rights. It's that those rights are often procedural, and it's not
Mhm.
necessarily an automatic right. So, and if you don't correctly account for how it actually plays out in reality, it can start to become very costly.
And with if you do end up doing the cash for keys, most people in that circumstance would do the N9 or the N11. But you had mentioned to me previously that the N11 is kind of like it's a good form, but it's not perfect. On the legal side, and maybe you can share this with the people on this call after, you've actually got your own drafted version of this that you think better protects it, correct?
Yeah, because an N11 is literally just a blank form where it states a termination date and both parties sign off, right? It doesn't talk about, how or how much money is being paid or how it's going to be delivered, when it's going to be delivered, any conditions about how the property is going to be transferred over, how is last month rent dealt with. So yeah, we have a customer agreement that we give to our clients, and we help facilitate these agreements, especially like again, our involvement is transactional. So we're often put into place of getting these done so that a property can then be listed for sale.
Mhm. One interesting data point that I ran recently, at least here in the city of Toronto, is that I took a look at all the properties or condos specifically that had been listed so far in 2025, and about 16% of the listings so far this year were tenanted properties, so they came to the market with a tenant in them, but they only represent 8% of the sales that have happened so far this year. So a lot of people ask, like, well, if it's with a tenant, how much lower am I going to get? And that number's kind of hard to give you an exact percentage on. But what I do know is it makes it very, very difficult. Your chances of selling almost get cut in half. And I think these are the data points that people need to be made aware of when they're deciding, because it's easy to put it up for sale with your tenant because you're like, they're still paying rent. So even if it doesn't sell, it's not sitting vacant. But I think people need to do calculations on every side of this. Next up, we're going to go to adapt and take control. So we've talked about a lot of actual things that we've seen right now. And Kayla, I want to start with you on this. You've built a super strong online community through Ontario Landlords Watch. How can advocacy and collaboration help landlords feel more empowered? Zachary mentioned there's groups that tenants have. You essentially have a group that landlords have that can teach people the actual rules and what to do. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think if you're in real estate, landlord, property manager, landlord, you have to be a part of some type of community group, somewhere where you can bounce some ideas off to each other. You can go through some tenant screening, ways of communicating with each other. Most importantly is when there's something coming out with rules and regulations of your government, no matter where you are across the country, you're going to be able to get the news and be aware of it and have that opportunity to speak with your elected officials. And I think it's very important for our landlords to speak with their elected officials, follow your elected officials from the Ministry of Housing to the Attorney General, everything that needs to be dealt with within your community. We're always trying to strengthen our landlords with the education, but the way that we need to strengthen our landlords now is through having them be a part of the monthly rent reporting. Because right now there's a lot of landlords and property managers and real estate agents, and we're very much disconnected. And yes, you're going to potentially get a really good reference from a legit landlord, and then you don't really quite know if it's a legit landlord. But the way that you're reporting the tenant's monthly payment history, you're not only helping the good tenants, but you're able to inform the landlord community of the tenants that need to bring that come with a risk. And that's why I've, became an ambassador to FrontLobby, because I see all the bills and the regulations that were coming, and knowing that landlords, if you look at it, we do have a lot of good tenants out there and they should be rewarded, but there is that fraction of professional tenants that are out there abusing the system, and we need to have a deeper way of communicating with each other and to hold those tenants accountable so that they don't do it to the next landlord. So it's very important that our landlords take advantage of this tool. And I tell people, I say, it's a tool, but it's the tool. It's the tool that every landlord and property manager across Canada and the States needs to be using in order to strengthen this industry, to prevent it from being abused. So that's how we're going to be able to take back control of our rental units, by utilizing these type of tools and services that are going to make you look professional and make sure that you're rewarding those good tenants who are keeping you in business, because this is a business. It's not a charity, and we have to make sure that we're praising these good tenants out there for doing their part, and making sure that they're holding their end of the bargain.
And Zachary, legally speaking, what are the most important protections or documents every landlord should have in place right now?
Yeah, and I mean, my answer is going to be kind of similar to what we just talked about with that and 11.
Yeah.
Number one thing I push is the additional terms, but for a lease agreement, right? There's of course limitations, right? We can't contract over the RTA protections, but there's still a lot of things that landlords can add to make, the tenancy smoother. So some things might be to include over the standard lease would be, entry rights, for example, right? The RTA doesn't even give a right for a realtor to enter to actually evaluate a property for sale, right? If that's not in your lease, technically that's not a valid reason for entry. And actually, I recently dealt with this, which I never thought I would see that one come up. And then even simple things like serving notice by email, right? That's required to be written in the tenancy agreement. So make sure that's in there, right? If it's not in your lease, then the tenant can increase the burden of just putting out those standard notice forms, right? And how they're actually deemed delivered. So, and if your agreement calls for, let's say, handling certain maintenance, right? Things like the snow and grass, right? There's situations where that has to be done in a very specific way, right? It has to be a severable agreement for certain properties. So, and nobody has a perfect set of clauses. But as a landlord, your additional terms kind of has to be like a living and breathing document, right? As you run into issues and you learn from situations, you add to it and you make that, or you continue to add to that document so it protects you in the next situation. One last thing I'll add with that, a well-drafted lease, it doesn't just help you when you actually need to use the legal process or actually show up at the tribunal. It helps you kind of avoid going there in the first place, right? Because if you come with a really detailed lease agreement, it kind of sets a tone, right? It shows that you're organized. It shows that you're serious and you're not someone to be taken lightly, right? In a lot of cases, just presenting that kind of lease in front of someone is going to weed out the wrong types of tenants before they even sign. So for me, it really comes down to take the time to build that strong set of additional terms, because it adds protections and it does work really well as a deterrent.
That's great advice. And Steve, going to you, with the investors your team is working with right now, what are they buying? Like what are the investors right now looking at and saying that's a deal? We know the condo numbers aren't working like they used to. Multifamily, I think still makes a ton of sense in a lot of different markets, depending on how many units. What are you seeing with the active clients you guys are working with?
I would say most of them are still buying condos. We've had the 3-unit coach homes be popular this year. But generally speaking, the detached market in my area anyway has gotten so far out of hand that, you can't buy a detached home for, let's say $1.5 million and rent it out for $3,500 a month, right? Like that's really not going to work. So they are still staying on the low end, but managing costs and staying profitable is definitely tough. So like for instance, one of the things I'm implementing right now, I'm coming off of on one of my units, a 5-year fixed rate that's been for a very long time. And that's been great. However, now this time I'm looking at a variable as I move forward, not because the rate is better, but I'm also looking then at, what is the cost to break the mortgage should I choose to sell it, right? So that's a factor that, you can't necessarily calculate that now, but it's like an insurance policy. Where's it going to be? So profitability is the hard part right now. And as far as what each person is looking for, that really depends on the investor, because you could be looking for a 6-unit place, or you could be looking just for a condo. I would say in my business, the overwhelming majority are mom and pop. It's 1 or 2 investment places, and it's usually condos just for price point.
But in your market too, like multiplexes are really taking off. You're seeing a lot of money going to that direction. That seems to be the next phase of where the maybe not big money, but just level below. That's where the money's going right now.
I think multiplex won't necessarily be as much of a rental play, because I believe in my market anyway, they're going to be mostly stratifying
Selling
them
them.
and selling them off.
Yeah.
But if you could build a 4-plex for yourself and have it be single title, there's massive benefits for you. But here in BC, as soon as you go to 5 units, all those benefits get stripped away, because you can't do things like self-use occupancy, that sort of thing. So the multiplex space is too new, and as we've discovered just this week, Burnaby is starting to scale it all back. So nobody's there yet.
Got it. Kayla, the next question I have for you, I'm not going to ask you because I have a different one I want to ask.
Okay.
There was new information today that came out with some significant potential changes to the way landlords and tenants will be dealing with each other. That's going into legislation. Can you fill in the people on this call today? What are like the 3 main talking points of what we heard today?
Oh my goodness. One, it was the bill that I've never thought I would see in the last 15 years. It was actually nothing in it for really tenants, which is very shocking because it was bill after bill just for tenants. This one is a way that they're shaking up the way that the landlord and tenant board kind of operates in their forms. One, they're going to do their forms. They're going to change the wording so that it shows the seriousness, because right now the forms just say, hey, you don't pay rent. Don't worry, you don't have to move out. So they are working with that. High level, just because it's still new, it's in the proposal level, it's got to go through of its reads. It's about introducing a fixed term lease. In Ontario, we don't have any fixed term lease. It automatically goes to month to month. So they're exploring what that looks like. I can't really see them incorporating it into current leases. It might be just new tenancies, what that looks like, and trying to raise the rent and to also potentially use personal use at that time. So that's still new. Normally in Ontario, we're working with after you serve a notice to the tenant for non-payment of rent, it's going to take like 14 days before you can file at the landlord and tenant board. They're now saying you can do that now in 7. Tenants usually had the opportunity to bring a maintenance concern if the landlord's bringing them to the landlord and tenant board for actual maintenance issues, as the landlord's bringing them for non-payment. They would be able to bring that up, and that would delay the process. So tenants have to do it well before a hearing date. But they also have to pay potentially 50% of any rental arrears in order to bring up these concerns as well. So that's really something where we've never seen that before, where you're telling the tenant that they actually have to pay the rent. Oh, there's so much adjudicators reining them in so that they're not capable of delaying. They're going to have requirements of how to if they have to delay an eviction or refuse an eviction, they're going to have requirements. And tenants are, oh, there was so much. I read it. So that's what I've been talking about all day on the phone. There is some other tidbits in there. I'm kind of going blank right now because I want to go into into all of it, but this is something where landlords should be celebrating that they see that there is a need for change at the landlord and tenant board. And I think these are going to speed up the landlord and tenant board process and stop the bad actor tenants from being able to abuse the system and abuse the landlord. So definitely jump over to the Ontario Landlords Watch page. You'll be able to find that full legislation and how it goes through the reading process for sure.
Feels like encouraging news that leading up to it, so much of it was just kind of on the other side, on the tenant side, and many of those things were needed. Some maybe went too far, but it sounds like this is encouraging news. Now, Steve, right now what we're finding is there is more rental inventory for many different reasons, and we've seen at least asking rents come down from probably the peak of the summer of 2023 for many markets in Canada. Those year-over-year numbers are a little bit down, and landlords that have a vacant unit, especially if it's a new condo that's just been delivered to them and the mortgage is kicking in and all the other things, they want to have a tenant in there yesterday. Like they really just want to get someone in right away. And I feel like as things kind of change and slow down and there's incentives offered and things like that, landlords are like, well, that credit score is not great. And I don't know, but like, if I don't take this person, when's the next person going to come? And they're not screening like they should. So from your experience, even if it's slower, how can landlords put themselves in the best, situation to not just put a tenant in there for the sake of doing it that could cost them later?
Well, I think this is actually causing a positive in the marketplace for landlords, because my thought is, or what I saw with clients anyway, that when the market was doing very well, they were like, look how high this rent is. I'm going to jam this person in. And now that they know the market's come down, rents have come down, I'm seeing people be much more cautious. That's actually like, like for instance, FrontLobby's tools to screen is the reason we're on this. Like I connected with FrontLobby because I was like, hey, this is I use it myself for my screening, right? But I'm starting to see people actually then rely on proper services to screen their tenants more, because what they're worried about, there's all the horror stories about the tenant moving in that then, let's say, doesn't pay the rent and becomes a professional tenant. But more than that, what if they move out in 2 or 3 months? Like you can't have those vacancies all the time. So it is important to screen properly. And I'm not seeing people panic to put them in. They might take somebody, the tenant pool might not be as good as it was a few years ago. And I'm finding that with my own units. But if the money gets tighter, I think the landlords thankfully are actually taking action to make sure they're protecting their investment, making sure if somebody just shows up with a printout of a Credit Karma, they're not trusting that. They're running them through a service like FrontLobby has, and then going, okay, well, this is the right person or the wrong tenant for me.
That's awesome. Well, not awesome, but I'm glad to hear that people are not.
Well, they are, right? Like it is really good to know that landlords are like, oh, this isn't just always the heyday. Things aren't just going to get better, and I can't just sell it for more money if the tenant's bad. I actually have to take responsibility. And I think that's our job as landlords, is to make sure we're taking that responsibility.
And knowing when you put the tenant in there, it makes it a lot more difficult to sell, right? So I think that's a big thing to keep in mind also. This will be our final poll of the evening. And the question is pretty simple. For you right now as a landlord on today's webinar, what's causing you the most amount of stress right now? So you got 4 different answers there. You got late payments, new laws and regulations, the rising costs, taxes, property tax going up in Toronto the last 2 years pretty significantly, the delays from the landlord tenant board. Make sure you get your answers in there, and we will get to it very shortly. We have our final looking ahead segment now, and then we're going to leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. So for the looking ahead segment, Kayla, I'm going to go back to you to get started here. And what gives you hope for landlords right now? Today's conversation was called "Is it the end?" It's not the end, but what gives you hope for moving forward, that we're in this position because of maybe government policy, maybe because of just what we went through with the market falling rents right now? How do you look forward?
I think it's the changes that government, I think, are starting to wake up. I hope that it's not too late, but with fighting delays and building Faster Act of 2025 that just got released today, it gives me hope, because I've never seen something like this before. And we're starting to see a decline in, the quality of tenants that are out looking around right now. But I can see with all the tools that are coming out, like even for FrontLobby's Landlord Assist, like there's now more support than ever for these landlords to keep them organized, to keep them professional, and keep them protected. And I think if you look at how they're, even with the building and development charges, like this is all a part of this bill that's happening. And I think they know that they need the private landlords, no matter which way you look at it, to help keep building the supply for the people that are coming here. But I am very this is probably the first time in 15 years I'm actually shocked, and I actually have hope that things are going to start to get better, because this is just about calling out that bad actors for us. But these landlords, we need as much education as we possibly can get. There's not a lot of support, no matter where they are. I know a couple of people in the comments are talking about like where they can get a BC group. Like obviously, I'll connect to FrontLobby to where they can share some of these online groups that are online through Facebook. And there's more that's happening through different social medias and media outlet programs. Like Cambridge Today has a community that they've created as well. So I'll definitely keep everybody informed, but I don't think it's the end. I think this is just the possibility of opportunists to come in and get a really good deal. And like I said, I think 2026 is going to be the day that year that we really get really good deals. That's my prediction. I don't get a crystal ball, but I still want to be in this business. It's a really good business. You just got to make sure that you're playing your cards right because it is a game. And you know, I always tell all of our haters out there, I'm like, don't hate the player, hate the game. But together we can change the game, and that's what we're doing here tonight by giving you guys a little bit of our tidbits.
Sounds like a guarantee for 2026. That's what I heard. All right, Zachary. I don't want to ask you the question that we had written down. I just want to get your perspective as a lawyer, looking at everything and maybe the new legislation that came into place today that Kayla had talked about. Kind of final thoughts on just everything to wrap it up on a bow today.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's encouraging news what we're seeing in that those proposed changes. Obviously, it still has to go through. So our hope is that a lot of what was proposed actually ends up, actually being the final laws that get enacted. But at the end of the day, like when it comes down to being a landlord, it really is a commitment to doing this beyond a hobby or that idea of passive income. And I get that a lot. And I see a distinct difference in certain clients that I have, right? Some that have been doing this for a long time and truly treat it like a business where they're investing the time to, understand or to build relationships with their tenants or to keep their records organized or to stay updated on the actual law. Or on the other side, to actually build the proper teams, right? Because there's always kind of two ways you can uh, go about this, right? You can be a landlord and an active one, or you can be an investor. And there's two distinct paths, and one isn't wrong, but it's making sure you stay in that lane and you do it properly. So if you're going to be an investor and you want this to be passive, then you need that right team, right? You need a good realtor, you need a good property manager, a good lawyer, and a good accountant, good software for rent reporting. So when it comes in, it's taking this beyond just I own a property, I'm going to collect rent, and we see what happens. To taking this seriously and to really going about trying to get better at being a landlord, because you see it in this kind of market where things are tough, and that's kind of where the good landlords actually have an opportunity to shine, right? It's an opportunity to put in place practices to get the right tenants when that market's slower, or to build your clauses or your rental agreements. So at the end of the day, it's making sure that you're treating this as a business and doing what you can to be able to make this a long-term business, if that's your goal.
I feel like it's kind of, I'm an analogy guy, but you go into the water and you get smacked by a big wave, and you can go back to the beach and cry about it, or you can wash the sand out of your eyes and go back in again, right? Like I think a lot of landlords have taken that hit and they're like, I don't, I'm just going back up. I'm out of here. I just think like there's life after this. It will get better. And I do believe very, very strongly that holding real estate for the long term is a very, very smart thing to do, even in the current market conditions that we are in today. Steve, final question for you. 25% of people on this call have already told us from the first poll that they are thinking of getting out of the landlording business. What would you tell them?
Well, in my market, and I know probably Tom and yours in Toronto, if, and I'm going to go back to maybe one of the first comments, was if your tenant does decide to give notice and you're thinking about selling, please do it, or please go about it when the unit is vacant, because it will cost you more if it's tenanted, and it will be very a hard, painful process. So the reason I say this is the market where we are right now, I'm sure Tom, it's the same where you are, the prices are coming down. So people are like, well, maybe if I hold on, I put another tenanted, I'll get a better price. But that better price I think is coming, but it's not coming in 6 months. So unless you're prepared to hold on, I think we're in tough. Again, mostly condo mom and pop investors is what I deal with. So I think we're in tough for the next 2, 3, 4 years to get those higher prices back. So if you don't want to be a landlord and you've had enough and your tenant moves out, take advantage of that and get out at that time, and don't hope that it's going to come back quickly. But my real, like, if I can't give advice because none of these people watching are my clients, but I think you will regret selling as well. So it will be a headache, but that headache in your retirement will be worth it. So consider those things. If I don't blame you if you want to cut bait, And I also think you should probably hold in there long-term for your long-term wealth.
I think that was a great way to wrap it up. Let's go to the poll results for the final poll here, and then we'll get into the Q&As to wrap things up today. So the biggest concern, 28%, is unpaid rent or late rent. The new regulations, only 10% concern. Maybe people are feeling more optimistic, Kayla, because of today's news. But the rising costs, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, is 44% of the biggest concern people have. And again, I'm actually kind of surprised that delays is only 18%. So, rising costs and later unpaid rent seem to be collectively, the biggest portion of what's maybe keeping landlords up at night right now. Now, we're going to jump to a Q&A section here. Because my screen is being shared, I'll come back to you in a second. I'm just going to stop sharing here for a second just so I can see the actual Q&A to maybe get to some of those questions here.
Tom, I see the first question. It's, do you like to watch the Tom Storey show? And I think the answer is yes. So
Yeah.
shameless plug for us.
Kayla and Zachary have both been guests recently, and they were awesome episodes, both well over 10,000
Highly
views
recommend,
now.
guys. I loved it.
Okay, so I'm gonna start here. Okay, I'm gonna go to Zachary for this one. I'm gonna answer Greg's question first, then we'll jump around here. What's the range right now, Zachary, you're seeing for cash for keys agreements?
It's a good question. I'll just give you the two most recent ones I've done. We had a $6,000 cash for keys, and the monthly rent, I guess that's probably the context you need, was $2,400, and the termination date was 30 days from the execution of that agreement. We did another one that was $18,000. That one, the monthly rent was $6,200, something like that, and that gave the tenant 60 days to vacate.
Oh.
Wow. Okay.
The biggest I've ever seen was 100,000.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
What was the rent on that?
Good question. I didn't have the rental rate on it. It was a purchase where it was a firm deal and he had to close, and the tenant was literally, that's what he was asking for. I was like,
Oh,
oh, Mike, I seen the N11, the agreement. It was legit. My face dropped, and he was like coming to me a week before the closing.
Jeez.
Extortion.
Steve, I'm going to go to you with this one because I think this is kind of interesting for your perspective right now. How do you deal with a reduced pool of quality tenants? I know me and you have been chatting about this a lot for your own property.
Yeah.
How are you dealing with that?
I've taken a few different, you have to, I think, first be okay with the fact that you may need to have a vacancy for a month or two to find the right person, because that's better than not. Definitely do not rush to get people in. It's really hard. So I'll give you a total trick that I do. Zach, don't tell me if it's legal or not in Ontario. But a total trick that I do is when I run my ads, I say, if you send me just a notice that says, like, is this available, or whatever the checkbox is that you can do on all of these sites, I will not respond to you. And so I actually say in my ad, read this ad. The first line says, read this ad all the way to the bottom. And the bottom says, please reply in this way. For instance, is no smoking, no pets, or whatever. Does this work for you? And then therefore I only reply to the people who have taken time to actually respond and read my ad correctly. So therefore I know they're already at least slightly invested in understanding what's going on. So that's one thing I do. It is getting a lot harder. It is getting a lot harder. I have also taken I don't buy my rental properties necessarily near rapid transit like a lot of people do, because I prefer my tenants to actually have access to a car, because I usually find that kind of gets them up to a next level as well. So it's just a couple of little tricks that I do, but I will tell you, take your time right now because it is getting harder.
Yeah, what do you do if the legal rental increase and you tell the tenant that, okay, the rent's going up by this much based on the new rules that have come out, and they just say, nope, I'm not paying the increase?
Oh, the 2.1?
Whatever it is for that year. One of the questions essentially, if you give them the form and you're telling them that you're doing it and you show them everything and there's like, I'm not paying the increase, is that the same idea as just not paying rent and then you have to start the process with landlord tenant?
Yeah, Yeah, it's like, hey, you're giving them proper notice. You're documenting that you gave them proper notice, and legitly everything is about document, document, document. And as soon as the time comes around and they're supposed to be paying that increase and they don't, you're hitting them with an N4, even if it's for the smallest little amount. 2.1, a lot of the tenants go, ha, that's it? Like, and they pay it. I don't see why we should have someone that would fight you on a 2.1%.
Right.
But if you are working yourself into a bigger one where your property is not underneath rent control, same process applies. Just
There's
give
a-
them the notice.
There's also a question here asking about specific screening tools for tenants. And obviously this is a front lobby event tonight. So Kayla, can you explain briefly what front lobby does for people that maybe on the webinar that don't know exactly what they do?
Well, FrontLobby being able to give landlords, small or big, the access to doing your own credit reports. And these credit reports are long form Equifax credit reports with the information coming from Landlord Credit Bureau. When you are screening your tenants and going through the application process, making sure that you have a detailed application, lining that application up with what the tenant is telling you through the viewing, and then matching everything that you collected to that credit report just based on their job, based on their addresses, based on what they're telling you. Always getting the copy of their ID to make sure that you're lining up the real person that you met there. I think that's what's important to understand, that there is going to be trickeries of, I am this person, and then you realize that's not the person you just did a credit check on, and you want to make sure that you have the tenant's information signed off on this application where they are giving you permission to do a credit check, which there's going to be something sent out to the viewers where they are giving out lease clauses and application clauses so that you can incorporate that into your lease and your application to get that permission. Putting it right into the rental application and the ad telling people that you are able to report their monthly rent payments to the credit bureaus. This is going to attract the good tenants, and it's also going to discourage the professional tenants from not wanting to be in your rental unit. And just having a proper system where there's a lot of toggles and services through FrontLobby where it reminds the tenants that rent is coming due, and it also sends out emails to the tenant letting them know what the consequences are for not paying their rents on time and in full. So a lot of these are going to help you find that perfect tenant, and the rest of it is going to be like the trickery of being a casual, laid back landlord, playing naive to it all, but you're going to be able to get them to open up. I have tenant tell me that they've been evicted before. Once you get them talking, you can't stop. So definitely reach out. I love to give you guys more tips on how I do my tenant screening, and it is tough, and we have to be cautious, and it sucks, but hey, government made us do it.
There's a few great questions.
Tom, wait, I'm going to co-host. I'm going to do the co-host thing here and
All
jump
right.
in because the first question is actually one I want. It's very long.
I was
so that's
coming up
maybe-
next, but go for it.
Oh,
Go.
you went to it because the person says they're in BC, but maybe Zach can answer this for Ontario because this is a very good question. So, what happened is the tenancy was signed, but the deposit was not paid, and then the tenant backed out of the agreement like a day. Let's say it's the day before there's to possess. So is that damages? Like, because there's no damage deposit paid at this point in time. But you're going to go vacant then for the next month. Is there any recourse there?
They're basically saying this is a contract. Should it not mean something? Right?
Yeah, so for me, my mind, right off the bat goes to jurisdiction, right? Who actually has jurisdiction to hear this? So is this going to be considered a tenancy where the LTB will actually hear this, or are they going to say, well, the tenant didn't actually move in, tenancy didn't start, therefore there's no jurisdiction. So then you may have small claims court. So simple answer, I don't know off the top of my head. I haven't dealt with this. It is a very good question. It's something
Can I
that maybe
can I give my tip maybe then? This
Absolutely.
is how I do it. Hopefully it's legal. Zach will tell me otherwise.
You're in a
if it's
different
not.
province, don't worry.
But yeah, okay, there you go. It's definitely legal in BC. When I meet with my tenants, I meet them in person to sign the tenancy agreement, and then that deposit is paid. I basically say, hey, it's yours. Like after I've screened them and everything, I want to let you know, congratulations, it's your unit.
Yeah.
Come on over to my place, or I'll go meet you at the unit, or whatever it is. Now you bring the deposit, I'll hold it for you. But just so you know, I'm not holding this for you, if you don't bring the deposit. And then, you know, that's when it's yours. So I've had people pay deposits a month and a half in advance to make sure I hold the unit for them.
I mean, in Ontario, if it's with a realtor, at least we get the deposit 24 hours after acceptance of the lease offer, and
Oh,
it's held
okay.
in our trust account. We do it much different than it's done in BC. Not, this is a BC conversation here. Someone had mentioned that they're right in the midst of vacating a tenant with an N12. LTB hearing date received yesterday for February 2026. So it's October 23rd right now. So that seems to be the turnaround time right now, in case anybody is curious about that. Someone asked here about you're not allowed to say no pets, are you? Kayla, do you want to answer that one for the pet? Does that come up a lot for you?
You know what? I think we used to be very picky and saying no pets, and we were trying to say dance around it, but a lot of it has to go with like emotional support animals. And again, like you have to allow them to have pets inside of the place. But when those pets start causing damage, when they start barking and they start ruining the enjoyment of others, now you have an issue that you need to solve, not only for yourself with the damages, but obviously you're held accountable to make sure that you're not ruining the enjoyment of your other tenants in the rental property. And sometimes it's not just about the pets, but it's so sucks. Like you think about dogs, it's not about dogs. Like, well, dogs end up causing like feces on the grass, ruining the enjoyment of others, attracting rodents to your property. Now it's a bigger issue. But I have a problem with male cats. It's that part is really damaging. And sometimes no matter what you're putting down on the floor, sometimes the floors are had to be pulled up. But that smells just still kind of lingers. And this is why it's important for our landlords to do routine inspections on your rental units. I know they don't like to do it, but even in Ontario, Bill 10, making landlords responsible for tenants' criminal activities, you want to make sure that you're doing your inspections and being very thorough in creating a report.
That's great. Zachary, someone had asked another question. They might have missed the first answer you gave, but they're saying, what's the range for cash for keys in Ontario? For example, if the current rent is 2,500, have you had any in that range that you've seen?
Yeah, I think the one I mentioned was $6,000 and that was 2,400.
There you go.
But again, it's not necessarily based on the rent. It's really situational.
Right.
Right. What's the reason they need it?
Maybe I can ask this for like the Ontario folks, Zach or Kayla. Are you seeing that? Because we're not seeing that. Or is cash for keys a legitimate thing you're seeing regularly?
Yeah, I see it quite regularly. Yeah, I mean, a little
Not
more
for crazy amounts of money though. I'm not seeing, usually like we've seen a lot of 2 months rent. Like, even if you give the N12, you got to give them 1 month's rent, at least in Ontario anyways. Usually it's like, hey, we're going to sell it. Do you want 2 months rent now to sign the N11?
Well,
and
that's
have it?
starting to change too with this new bill.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and the biggest consideration is always going to be, is the rent that they're paying actually market rent, or is it well
True.
below, right? The further below market rent it is, the more that amount to get them out is going to cost you.
There's a good question here regarding tenants installing Ring doorbells and cameras. Are there rules in multiplexes as far as where they can place cameras? Is a tenant allowed to install one in the common area of a multiplex? Anyone can chime in on this.
Zach's looking at me. I'm looking at Zach.
My head goes to reasonable enjoyment for your other tenants, right? You would start to interfere with their comfort and their rights, and that's a common area. So I don't have a clear answer, but where my mind goes is probably not.
And I would
Yeah,
think
common
you're
areas, no.
you're renting out the unit, not the common area.
Right.
But at the same time, if you're like, you have to make sure, even as a landlord, that you have signage on your property that you have cameras on the property. They can't be pointed at doors. They can't be pointed at windows. You have to give them a lot of notice if you are installing it to the properties for their security of whatnot. But yeah, it really does suck, especially if they have it pointed in their windows, and then it causes some conflict with the tenants. But you just have to, when the problem arises, you got to make sure that you're doing your part in addressing it for the other tenants.
All right. I just wanted to bring the screen back up for a second here, just to make sure that everybody knows that they are getting free resources from FrontLobby for coming on today's webinar. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Kayla, Zachary, Steve, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to chat. I really hope that anyone that came on today's webinar learned something new, maybe picked up a tip. All of our information to reach out to us is right here. So this is all of our direct emails. If you have questions for any of us we are happy to have the conversation. Zach's the only one that can give legal advice, but we can have conversations and tell you what we've seen. Me and Steve more on the selling and buying of property side, Kayla on the whole scope of things, and Zachary on the legal side. I want to thank FrontLobby for putting this together tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. And make sure to check out FrontLobby. Make sure to check out Ontario Landlords Watch with everything that Kayla is doing. And if you like this conversation tonight, hey, maybe you'll like the podcast me and Steve do every Sunday. It's just called the Tom Storey Show. You can check us out there. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see you in one of these sooner than later.
Happy renting, guys.